Thank you, Ray, for leading us in that prayer, and good morning, everybody. And I apologize for being a bit late. I was in a radio interview with a more friendly media host. It was a NPR station out of Seattle, and I just wanted to say how thankful I am for this opportunity and for the presentations that were made yesterday, both by the panelists and by those who spoke from among the participants. This really is useful to my work as I try to put down in writing the conditions and aspirations and concerns of indigenous peoples of this country and develop recommendations that will go into a formal report. But I think more importantly, what struck me was that I think it's just important to get together like this on as many occasions as we can to share these stories, share these aspirations, share these concerns. I think it's very empowering for all concerned. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to sort of, in an effort to keep the conversation going to the extent we can, using social media and the internet and email and so forth, just again emphasize that at any time you or others can submit information to me that is relevant to my mandate, which is the concerns of indigenous peoples worldwide, including the concerns of indigenous peoples in this country. And if you're able to send it to me within the next couple of weeks, say a month, it will be relevant to my report. You have, there are two handbooks actually that you have. One is on the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the other is on the role of the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And this handbook explains what this mandate is about, what this position is about, in relation to other mechanisms that you know about or may know about, like the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the expert mechanisms, which are distinct, but which are also part of this UN concern for indigenous peoples. As you know, those institutions do studies, look at coordination within the UN system and so forth, and my mandate, by contrast, is to actually look at specific situations and to address those situations and make recommendations on them. And so this is the mandate that actually looks at specific problems and has the mandate authority to try to address those in some way. And like I said, I welcome information at any time. The information on how to submit information, on how to submit documentation is in here. And we also lay out in the handbook the kind of information that's useful for us to act upon the situation that you're bringing to my attention. I have to point out that my resources are necessarily limited by the limited resources of the United Nations. I have a couple of very able staff people with me, very committed staff persons from the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights in Geneva, Maya Campbell, and Georgia Passarelli here. Raise your hand. And then we have, then we supplement that with students here at the University of Arizona, many of the ones you're seeing around, that work with me. We do what we can to take all this information and put it in the documentation and be effective in the work that we do in communicating directly with governments and other concerned about these. And then finally, I just want to say that a very important part of this is that whole exercise is really consciousness raising. It always strikes me when I deal with governments and the media more broadly, because I do deal with the media for better or for worse in the context of these visits. It always strikes me how little knowledge and awareness this is within the society at large about Native Americans. Rob mentioned Bill O'Reilly's rant on his show. He's a Fox News character. He was just saying, well, why is the UN doing this? We should just move on. Everybody knows what happened in the past. Why don't we just looking at other issues? There's, like it's a no big deal. There's no concern. Just move on. There's, it's just digging up old wounds that shouldn't be dug up. I mean, that's the attitude, right? What is this about Native Americans? And then Dennis Miller says, oh, they're not really Native Americans anymore. They're the casino owner Americans. And that's what it's been reduced to. That's the popular media, of course. That's the sort of right or center right, to put it well, anyway, you know what I mean, media, but nonetheless, it's a substantial slice of America, of the American public that thinks that way. So consciousness raising, the stories that we heard yesterday are so important to get out there. They are so important to get out there. I'm committed to do what I can through this extraordinary position I have that I feel very privileged, honored, and humbled really to have for now. And I'm committed to use it to do what I can to get these stories out there. But I think that's something we can all think about, how we can do it. I was very happy to see an op-ed in the New York Times that Angela did that was, I think, very influential, very important, you know, showing how the avatar sort of imagery was not quite right, but, you know, maybe it's something we can build upon, I don't know. But that kind of thing, you know, reaching out to the society at large. I think, and that's consistent with the spirit that everybody's talking about. We're not talking about, as some might say, go back to Europe kind of thesis of addressing these problems. You know, go back to Europe to the non-indigenous people. But we're talking about going back to that original spirit that indigenous people had in this country when the Europeans came, and that was what was one of peace and coexistence, and attempt at harmony. And I think that's really the spirit that I hear people saying repeatedly. How can we go back to that? There's this unbalance that's been generated over time. How to go back to that attempt at harmony that was that original spirit. I think that's what we're talking about. So to get out that message of, well, what's really happening? What are the concerns? And then a model of coexistence that really is just and allows for that peaceful coexistence that we all aspire to, I think is what we need to all strive to do. So anyway, with that, I look very much forward to the panel discussion today, and I want to again thank the panelists and here now and those to come, and all of you who are going to present for being here and contributing to this.
And thank you, Ray, for that prayer. And I also want to recognize another of our local tribes, Chairman from Pascua Yaqui tribe, Chairman Yucapicio. Thank you for attending very much. So the next panel then is on a really critical issue. And we've invited 3 speakers. And we wanted to get a real breadth of experience on this topic of language, culture, and sacred sites, sacred lands. Susan, is it sites or lands?
Places.
Places. It should be places. Okay. Susan's tried to educate us. We've gone through various iterations, but sacred places. And we've asked Leonard Gorman to chair this particular panel. Leonard was the perfect choice. Leonard is the executive director for the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. He's had extensive experience in the legislative branch. But for me, most significantly, Leonard has really been, you know, the spearhead and really one of the leaders and visionaries of the Navajo Nation's really movement to the forefront of the international indigenous human rights movement. They've become a real presence. And I really think in so many ways, you know, they're a tribe that in many ways is blessed with many resources, but we heard many, many horrible stories about Navajo. You know, I was telling Leonard, you guys are under attack. You're under assault. And Leonard has really, you know, been there and been to Geneva, has been to the OAS, and has made that tribal voice heard. And so to have that type of leadership from a nation with the resources and also the human rights problems, because a nation, you know, who can, you know, afford to send people to Geneva. For many of you, it's just been very difficult just to get here. So you can imagine the expense, and there's so many priorities that the Navajo Nation has, but this is enough of a priority that they do invest those resources. And I think, again, this is important enough work that it ought to be a priority for all tribes. And so we're very honored to have Leonard chair this panel. As moderator, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Yate. Traditionally, the protocol for Navajo is to introduce ourselves as indigenous persons and people. I see some of my relatives here, my family members by clan, so I have to introduce myself first. Yate, Shema, Do Shema San Aren Hai Sakhaigi, Asin zade ngilda isje do ides ilnaso. Adon da sheya kinast in insle. Adon da deschini basischin. Ado tisa khadi da chopi bitoin da snal. Nazlande na aisin na shande da tsuhaw zanike alchin bilkaste. Alchin e ya tokhane data. Adon da naba Washington banash nisho da da kwisin shinakhe do kuje belash lai holiad ne ishin do batsa ba hoin in do batsa tol tel no bida inishi ji ag aj lan shol ni do shandar ni shi lop dash so ado ho commissioners and lini lon ha sky ishi udan hije da this good morning. My name is Leonard Gorman. I'm executive director for the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. And as Rob introduced the panel here, my office was established in 2006, and we started the work in 2008, hitting the ground about Indigenous rights issues, Navajo human rights issues. And we have some members of the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission that are here. We have a 5-member panel, and we have 8 staff in the office. I just want to acknowledge the commissioners that are here. We have Commissioner Irving Gleason. He's a professor of literature. And then we have the chair of the commission that's also here, Mr. Dwayne Ekshazi. Both are in the back. And then one of the members is a panelist also here. And also I have some staff that came down here that articulate issues in the international community, write policy statements and things of that nature. Ms. Naomi White is our attorney. And then Mr. Rodney Tahi is our policy analyst, and he concentrates on international issues. And then finally, Ms. Charlene Smith, she's our office manager that deals with all of the day-to-day activities. I just want to introduce the panelists here by going over some of the activities that we have in the office and some of the nuts and bolts of the initiatives that we do as a Human Rights Office in the world. We had the privilege of engaging Special Rapporteur James Anaya a couple of years ago, and this is pertaining to a sacred place in Arizona, and all of us that are here from various indigenous communities and lands, we are well aware of the desecration of the San Francisco Peaks as a sacred place. We had a report that came in from Professor Anaya, and some of the findings that are being put forward, my office and the Navajo Nation is pursuing ways to address those concerns. We've applied using other organizations, the non-government organization, the International Indian Treaty Council was very helpful in also pursuing the recognition of a violation that has been occurring for over a century. And that violation, as Professor Anaya has indicated, is that Navajos and all those stakeholders that have belief in the San Francisco Peaks as a sacred site, their rights of free, prior, informed consent been violated. They have never consented to the construction of the resort and other expansions and developments that have been occurring and ongoing occurrences of those developments. So we're asking through the Navajo government to have the U.S. government to recognize not only that report, but also the opportunity to suspend the permit until those conditions are reached, meeting the free, prior, informed consent aspects. We had a letter that came in from the CERD, Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. It's a treaty body that examines these type of violations, and they've issued a letter to the United States. The United States has up to July 31st this year to respond to the concerns that are being raised at the CERD level, along the lines of the DAN issues of the taking of the land. That's also need to be responded. So we're looking forward and marked our calendars July 31st, 2012 as another benchmark and a date to look at as far as responses from the United States. The other recommendation that my office has made to the UN system is that Navajo Nation, like other indigenous nations, are equivalent to stature as a nation state, all the 192 member states of the United Nations. Because of the recognition by nation states in the UNDRIP, UNDRIP spells out, as we talked about yesterday, self-determination, self-government, autonomy, aspects of tribal governments or indigenous nations. It is important that the United Nations recognize that indigenous peoples have a seat at the table and the possibility of having a vote on the floor at the UN system. So we've examined those avenues, and my commission through the Navajo Nation has submitted a report last week in which the recommendation is that at least a start would be that indigenous nations, indigenous peoples have a stature of a permanent observer at the UN system. The other aspect that we're examining along the lines of the San Francisco Peaks issue is the feasibility of pushing these violations, human rights violations, in the international arena. We realize that as the information surfaces today and yesterday and today and into the future, that nation states have just now begun to examine indigenous human rights issues, much like the ideas about self-determination. Self-determination is relatively new concept. It's about 40 years old, 60 years old. Indigenous issues are now coming to surface. So the more times that we as indigenous nations surface these issues in the international arena, the more opportunity that we have that the voice would be out there and it would be examined by the world community. So we're beginning to organize ourselves and our issues and our strategies to examine the feasibility of entering the Inter-American Commission for the examination of the violation of the free, prior, informed consent. And finally, we make every effort to try and be a participant in these international discussions as much as we can. We just came back from a discussion at an arm of the UN system, the Organization of American States. The Organization of American States, along the time that the Declaration was being developed, they also embarked upon the idea of recognizing indigenous rights in the Western Hemisphere. We just came back from that meeting. There are a number of articles that have been accepted, including the concerns about culture, language, intellectual property aspects. So those are some of the current initiatives that we have as an organization on the Navajo Nation. So all of this credit goes to the staff of the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission and also the commissioners that provide us guidance and recommendations and direction as to how to address these concerns. So coming to this session and this morning, there are several articles that surface and discussions that entail the recognition of language, the culture, and also sacred sites. And we view these aspects, these three principles, as essentially the nuts and bolts of who we are as indigenous peoples. Language is important. Be able to speak our language, carry on a conversation, and also be able to dictate the direction of the people in the future. Language is a very important aspect. And in the Declaration, it talks about the need for the revitalization, the use and development and transmission for future generations, indigenous peoples' histories, languages, cultures, philosophies, written systems, and literatures. And some of the aspects in the Declaration, it will talk about the state. The states must do this. And that is as an example. When the language says in paragraph 3 of Article 13, states shall take effective measures to ensure that this right is protected. What that also means to us as a Human Rights Office is that effective measures means that funding level must also be effective enough to carry on this protection. So the school systems, the public school systems, the federal school systems, those are some aspects of ensuring the effectiveness of those issues. And then Article 14 also talks about the language aspects, Article 16. And then in the cultural aspects, the preambular paragraphs really talks about the culture, the need for culture worldwide, recognition of cultural diversity. And Article 8 talks about indigenous peoples and individuals having the right to not be forcibly assimilated and their cultures be destroyed. Article 11, 15, and 31 also talk about these concerns. And then on sacred sites, Article 25 is a very strong language about having the ability to visit and continue the connection between sacred sites of the Navajo Nation. And we utilize this paragraph to assert concerns in regards to the international fora. The other aspect is other international instruments, such as the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, paragraph 27, talking about as a minority, when you live in a community, you must exercise your religious rights and religious practices. We've also used that opportunity to force the United States to respond to our concerns. So in that respect, we have a lot of issues before us when we talk about language, when we talk about culture, and when we also talk about the need to protect all of these aspects. The United States has made some statements in the international arena, like, for example, under the UPR process. It said in the response by nation states that it will guarantee the rights of indigenous peoples and to fully implement the declaration. Those are some of the comments that they made, but the unfortunate aspect of all of this discussion that we have is in the last week's meeting that we were in. The United States just folded its arm in the OAS session and said, I'm just here to listen, because this is a policy that we have from the Bush administration. And I'll just read one of the paragraphs that they presented to the discussion. And it says, the United States is reserving its position on the final text under discussion and does not join in any text that might be approved or otherwise appear in the chair's rolling text of the 11th meeting of the OAS working group. And that's really a shame. When we're talking about these type of issues, the state of the United States is just sitting there wanting to listen, not say anything. We need to have that meaningful dialogue. So with that, I want to introduce the first speaker on the panel. I've had the privilege and honor to work with this member, the commission member, and he's always been very attentive to the work of our staff and has provided us ample amount of guidance. And I have the privilege and honor to work with Mr. Steve Darden as one of the commissioners on the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. He has chose to be on the commission because he believes his experience as a city judge gives him the unique perspective to look at all cases of alleged discrimination, prejudice, and racism from a fair and impartial view. And he has had ample experience as being a city councilor and also a magistrate pro temp, and has had honors and recognitions as a volunteer from various organizations. And I take privilege to introduce Mr. Steve Darden.
Ja, sitzele. Da natso, anik yahagi. Allah khadadin sad ba Allah sit hichin adole. Ya shazane da nasnigi. Shastri. And da shamado shada nasnigi shtkhat nasnigi. Ado sitsalke shike shikeshadna. Ado kya shitsui. Dat zouden bij de geheim ziet of het gaat in de geheim nellige. Achja de schneedolig. Ado achja gaat het in saad alles ziet tot niet nan adolig. Ado schlojo. Ado nadista. Ado het gewoon gaan eensne. Van waar niet gaan essen. De haskan het zo het na altijd niet zo is niet de eensne. Belakana dona Sunday bashishina kon bet ane ish jabinshna. Edashan nalado Kachini edashchi. Adosha alchin ed kachini no da. I want to take privilege, as our formal written statement has already been submitted, as a commissioner and as a traditional practitioner, to beseech all of you that are now Navajos for your patience, your forbearance, your indulgence. I also want to, before I offer a song about this place that we're talking about, acknowledge my precious brother, Mr. Lenny Foster, and his late mother and his late father. One of the reasons I chose to serve on this commission is his work with our Native inmates and working hard to ensure that their spiritual rights are protected and their human rights are protected. I also wish to acknowledge Carrie Dan. 41 years ago, I stood in her front yard with her sister, Mary, never knowing that one day we would serve in somewhat the same venue. So yesterday, in my language, we said to her, the International, that I got to sit and stand beside her for the battle that she has fought in behalf of her Western Shoshone peoples, and how I get to sit alongside of her in this honored position with this esteemed gentleman, Mr. James Anaya, and my fellow commissioners. I want to also offer the song, not to disrespect my staff in any manner. We have an awesome staff. But I want to take privilege as a Diné citizen, as a traditional practitioner, because we cannot just say words about these mountains. We have songs that have emanated from their spirit. Those songs were revealed to first man and first woman and passed down to our forebears. One of those forebears that I had the privilege to be raised by was my fourth generation grandmother. I wish to state her name for the record. Shachoya Jendapa, originally from a place called Spider Rock. And I'm going to state this for the record for my children, my grandchildren yet to be born. Mr. Luke Madrigal and your dear wife, I want to say thank you for your precious children being present so that they can witness and hopefully carry on the legacy of those such as Carrie Dan and Mr. Lenny Foster and others who have worked in these ways for your peoples. For the children that I saw yesterday, that's who we're here for. So I'm going to take privilege, and again, I bid your patience, your forbearance, your indulgence as we offer a song. And I ask you to join with me. We have, as Indigenous peoples, a universal spirit that guides us and abides with us. Hum along with me, because it's a song that connects us to that which is sacred. And we are sacred, for we are of the earth. Our earth suit connects us in that manner. And as my Hawaiian relatives stated, not just to humanity, but to what we call the Standing Green Nation, our medicines, our tobaccos. For those winged creatures, I'm of the Eagle clan, adopted by the Oto Missouri and the Water clan, Oto Tobaskin. And I'm my Cheyenne relatives, people of Mahayo, the turtle family on this turtle island. That's my heritage on my daddy's side. So I ask that you join with me in that manner, that fashion, because I want the spirit of these mountains to be heard at the UN level and hopefully resonate rhythmically into the hearts and minds of the leadership of this nation. To recognize that my biological father paid the ultimate price and died in defense of this country. And almighty divine holy ones, on my birthday, June 1st, 1981, the day that the Treaty of 1868 was signed, God gifted me a new daddy by the name of Wilsie Bitsy, one of the original 29 co-talkers. And he said to me, son, my language, my tongue did not kill one human being. In fact, son, it saved millions. And that was my service to this country, he said. He wished no accolades. He wished no awards, no honors. He said, I did it in prayer, and I want you to carry on that legacy. And so with that, Lenny, to your late father, I'll offer the song for a language that was used. Anaya yang tsu ya shasna tsu ya shasna ya tsu ya shasni ya na yang tsu ya shasna tsu ya shasna ya tsu ya shasni ya na yang katse yasna jinni ya be ya ke ya shangat shekenal kishko ya shangat Bekenash kishko yeshangat, bejahanas ziko yeshangat, jajahanas ziko yeshangat, su yashefne, su yashefne, ya su yashefne, ya na yang katson wotzi ye beya ke yeshangat, shekenal kishko yeshangat, bekenash kishko yeshangat, jajahanas ziko yeshangat, bejahanas ziko yeshangat, su yashefne, su yashefne, ya su yashefne, ya na yang kato wako usli ye beya ke yeshangat, shekenal kishko yeshangat, bekenash kishko yeshangat, shejahanat ziko yeshangat, bejahanat ziko yeshangat, su yashefne, su yashefne, ya su yashefne, ya na yang kati ye benet sang beya ke yeshangat, shekenal kishko yeshangat, bekenash kishko yeshangat, shejahanat ziko yeshangat, bejahanat ziko yeshangat, su yashefne, su yashefne, ya su yashefne, ya na yang kati yesna otkitli ya beya ke yeshangat, shekenal kishko yeshangat, bekenash kishko yeshangat, shejahanat ziko yeshangat, bejahanat ziko yeshangat, su yashefne, su yashefne, ya su yashefne, ya na yang katsi yechot ya beya ke yeshangat, bekenal kishko yeshangat, bekenash kishko yeshangat, shejahanat ziko yeshangat, bejahanat ziko yeshangat, su yashefne, su yashefne, ya su yashefne, ya na yang su yashefne, su yashefne, ya su yashefne, ya na yang. It said the spirits of the holy ones animated within these mountains, such as the San Francisco peaks, revealed themselves through their essence. They said there are 7 of them, and those 7 abide within us. And that's where we have the guidance. For instance, in the 3rd round of our sweat ceremony, we bring 7 stones in. And we stand and we face, as Dr. Austin just shared with us, to the east first, to the south, to the west, to the north, below us and above us, in that 7th direction where we occupy. The center of our heart connected to our mind, our spirits. And these songs came dancing with the plants, the herbs, male and female essenced, and they revealed themselves. And they came with these sacred herbs and these sacred medicines with their names. They each have names, and the grandmas know those names. They don't just pluck them. They have, oh my goodness, I see the word Ute, so I'll take privilege to take that, because I'm married to a woman that's part Ute, so I'll take more than that. But thank you. 4 times my people, the Navajo Nation, pressed the issue through the legal process, and all those pieces of legislation that were effected did not help my peoples in that manner. But let me just close it with this. The elders one day asked me to speak at the city council hearing. My tribal president had spoken and other leaders had spoken. And I looked at my wife and I said, loan me $1. She chuckled and she brought out $1. And I spoke to the corporate officials, their attorney, and the city council members. I held up that $1 and I said, here on the back of your legal tender, it says, "In God we trust." I said, I submit to you, you don't trust God anymore. Therefore, you're trying to make fake snow. You're trying to be God instead of being godly. Therefore, you have no regard for my people's belief in the sacredness and the divinity of this holy place. So I guess this is a fake public hearing. I guess this is a fake city hall hearing. I guess what you're doing is fake, so I'm just going to trust my holy ones that ultimately we will prevail, because those songs that emanate from that sacred place will not be diminished by the choices and decisions that are rendered in the halls of what you call justice. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you for this, the privilege to offer this song in this place. I offer it not for you. I offer it for my grandchildren yet to be born. The sad reality is that our language is being so greatly diminished, but my elders told me these 4 words that I spoke earlier are the 4 significant words. And as I utter those words, I plant those seeds and they will grow, they will be nurtured by the holy ones. I don't need to worry about that because they are from those sacred places, particularly in those mountains where we make our pilgrimage to make our offerings. No disrespect to you, sir, but I will close and ask that you say these words with me, and I will close. Say with me, Yate. That means it is good. Say Ahyaha. That means thank you. Say Shekhojo. I am happy. I am grateful. Nadista. I have risen. I am well, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. And that's all that's important. So that much I'll say. Thank you much. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Darden. The song that's sung had us travel, as we understand the language and the words in the song, from east, south, west, north, and came back to the east. And that's the journey that it took us through. And unfortunately, a lot of times, our own people can't make that journey simply because on the Navajo Nation, those mountains that are mentioned and named in the songs are outside the boundaries of the Navajo Nation. So it's important that in the report that Professor Anaya is going to be formulating, that Article 25 of the Declaration has full implementation and full respect for all indigenous peoples, and these are some of the characteristics of language and culture. The next area of concentration that this individual has, is an evolving expert in this area, pertains to Article 31 of the Declaration. And that Article 31 talks about the maintenance and control and protecting and developing cultural heritage, cultural knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions, as well as the ability to manifest the science, technologies, and cultures, including human and genetic resources. And that we as indigenous peoples have the right to maintain, control, and protect and develop our intellectual property over our cultures, our heritage, our traditional knowledge, and our traditional cultural expressions. So I take privilege to introduce to you Angela R. Riley. She's a professor at the University, UCLA's School of Law, and director of the UCLA American Indian Studies Center. And I'm very privileged to indicate that this individual is a graduate from the Harvard Law School and has clerked for Judge Kern at Northern District of Oklahoma, and has had the opportunity to be appointed as her nation's onto the Supreme Court. and is becoming the first woman and youngest justice of the Supreme Court of the citizen Potawatomi Nation of Oklahoma. And she was elected as Chief Justice and has had the opportunity to examine intellectual property issues pertaining to Indigenous peoples. So with that, Ms. Riley, Chief Justice Riley.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm over here. I'm going to use a PowerPoint, so I'm attempting to do this standing. And just a plate, nothing major. Thank you all so much for having me here. I wanted to start by giving my deep gratitude to all of you for this wonderful event, and in particular for the Rapporteur for being here to listen to the concerns of the Indigenous peoples of the United States, and also, of course, to Professor Williams and all of Arizona Law School. You've done an amazing job and been so hospitable, and I have to thank the students and all the people around who I see keeping this whole event going, who've been incredible, and I just really deeply appreciate it. I'm honored to be on this panel. I'm honored to be seated with such esteemed colleagues and mentors that I've looked up to for many years in my own education and career. I did take Indigenous Peoples and International Law from Jim. He taught me way back in, I don't know, 1996 or something. So I guess I learned a lot, but I feel like I've been on a long educational process. So I just wanted to make a couple of prefatory comments. First, I am a law professor at UCLA and director of the American Indian Studies Center there, but I really am here speaking individually as a scholar. I'm not speaking for my nation, which is the Citizen Potawatomi Nation of Oklahoma, or for any particular group. So some of the issues I'll talk about here, I imagine there's going to be a wide divergence of viewpoints on some of the topics, so I don't mean to present them as if there's a monolithic answer to any of these, but I really just want to raise some of the issues that I see coming down the road that I think are worthy of highlighting for the Rapporteur and in the upcoming report. I think the most important thing above all is that I be brief so that we can turn to what you all have to say. And who's got my time? You're keeping my time. I'll keep an eye on you. Thank you. So the first thing I wanted to do is I just want to relate this back at the request of our organizers to the Declaration itself. I know that you all have a copy of the Declaration, so I'm not going to go through the provisions in any kind of detail, but I did just want to touch on the Declaration and bring the conversation back to the Declaration and ground it within it. And I do this just because I think as we think about moving forward, and I'll talk a little bit about this more at the end, but when we think about moving forward and implementation of the provisions of the Declaration on the ground, and of course as both a tribal member and as a lawyer, when I think about implementation of the Declaration, I think about how do we begin to develop a jurisprudence around Indigenous rights within the United States that will encompass the provisions of the Declaration. And I think one critical way to do that is through the process that the Rapporteur mentioned this morning, and the consciousness raising, and starting to speak in the language of the Declaration and to articulate Indigenous rights within that language. So I refer you very briefly to some of the key provisions that deal with the issues I've been asked to discuss today: language, culture, and sacred sites. Language, you have Article 13, which expressly sets forth baseline presumptions for language, and Article 14, which deals with the protection of language in educational contexts. The Declaration is replete with provisions dealing with culture, and that goes to a point that I'm going to talk about in just a moment. Really, the whole Declaration, in my view, is about cultural survival. That's one of the key underlying philosophies of the Declaration, along with the right to self-determination, which is also, of course, part of maintaining one's culture throughout time and into the future. So you see many references to culture and protections for culture in the Declaration, including in Article 8. In Article 11, similarly, protections for culture, but also emphasizing the language of free, prior, and informed consent, which our esteemed moderator has already mentioned in the context of the protection of sacred places for Indigenous peoples. Article 12 also mentions culture, but in a particular way, and that's in regards to repatriation, which I want to talk about briefly today as well, and the repatriation of both human remains and ceremonial objects. And then Article 31, which deals with a particular type of cultural protection, and that's intellectual property or intangible cultural protection. And that's an area that I've worked extensively in. I see as a massively growing area. I had the opportunity last summer to go present an address to the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva on the issue of the protection of indigenous peoples' traditional cultural expressions and traditional knowledge. So that's a burgeoning area, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about that, and we've seen a lot of that in the US, and that's going to continue to be an issue. And finally, in regards to sacred sites, numerous provisions could be construed to deal with sacred sites. I think Article 25 is probably one of the strongest. So with that as the baseline in relation to the declaration, I just want to make a few points. First of all, in terms of implementation of the declaration, there are a few things that I think are critically important, or at least when I was thinking about what to talk about today, I thought, you know, this is such an amazing group of people with so much experience, and you're living so much of these issues on the ground and dealing with them. So what viewpoint do I have that could possibly be of help, both to the rapporteur in making his report and to this group in advancing Indigenous rights? So some of the things that I think might be important moving forward, I'm going to talk about. And the first is looking at the Declaration as a living document. And that is to say, the metes and bounds of the Declaration have not been fully formed. It's a capacious document. It has the ability to do an infinite amount. And how it ultimately gets employed, interpreted, and utilized is yet to be seen. We don't really know yet. It's very embryonic. But I think one of the important things to do is to look at it as a living, thriving document that's capable of accommodating the kinds of rights and claims that Indigenous groups are desiring and needing to make. And so I think if you look at its language, and this is one of the points I wanted to make in terms of trying to bifurcate out the protections for language and culture and sacred sites, they're really all interconnected. The Declaration itself is, I think, interconnected in the sense that it's meant to advance the self-determination of Indigenous groups. The second point is that I think the Declaration sets forth a series of rights, but also responsibilities that are internally connected and externally connected. And what I mean by that is that there was some discussion yesterday of the responsibilities that go along with the rights. And the Declaration does articulate rights, but I think one of the things that sometimes gets lost, and I see in particular in the Western court system, the judges don't understand the underlying context of the responsibilities that Indigenous peoples are trying to articulate to the land in particular. In my experience, when I hear Indigenous groups make claims about rights in regards to land, there is a whole host of responsibilities that attach to that they are also advancing. The ability to continue throughout time to pay their own duty, to serve their own duty to the earth, its continued vitality, and to the generations to come. And sometimes I think that language doesn't get fully formed. And it's an important part of making outsiders understand the Declaration and understand the rights that Indigenous peoples have to the land. Wow, I really am. I'm really good about time, but I'm going to pick it up. The other thing I just want to say, I think it does all link back to land. And I thank Carrie Dan very much for her comments yesterday. Of course, she's a hero of many people in this room. And really, if you try to think about the role that language plays in your community, the role that culture plays in your community, and if you're just thinking in terms of even natural resources, so much of it links back to the massive dispossession of land from Indigenous peoples. And that's a huge source of so many of the other problems that we confront, including repatriation of human remains, preserving our cultures for the future. So some current issues, I'm just going to list these very briefly so that I don't go over my time, but some of the issues that are coming up, there are repatriation issues going on all across the United States. I'm the chair of the UCLA NAGPRA Committee for Repatriation at UCLA, and dealing with some repatriation issues within the UC system. Some human remains that were supposed to be repatriated to the Kumeyaay. There's now been a lawsuit filed just in the past couple of weeks by professors actually in the UC system to prevent that repatriation on the grounds that those remains are not Native American and should be subject to scientific study. So that's a typical case. I think there are more cases like that out there. And also, I want to just mention, I have to mention the Genesis Solar Project and the Okatie Express Wind Project that are both projects coming up in the desert to try to find new sources of renewable energy in the United States. But as a result of ineffective consultation with tribes, there are sacred places that are going to be destroyed if those projects go forward as quickly as they're currently planned to. I have a picture here of a geoglyph of woman and jaguar. This is at the Genesis Solar site. This geoglyph is believed to be over 10,000 years old, and it will be destroyed if the project continues at the current pace. So there are numerous places like this. This is not the only one. So these are issues, pressing issues of concern. And in closing, I just want to say that what we're seeing now, especially in regards to lands and sacred places, is a massive push for development and extractive industry because of the increasing global population and because of the enormous wealth that we can find in natural resources today. And indigenous peoples are the most vulnerable people in the world in that regard. And there's no group of people in the world that cares more about the earth, its resources, and its continued vitality than indigenous peoples. And so the voice of indigenous groups and of the people in this room in protecting those resources is vital in making sure that the Declaration is respected in regards to sacred places. And I just want to say, in addition to that, that as a strategic matter, and we could probably have a big debate on this one, but as a strategic matter, I think, in my view, there is a long history in the United States embodied in treaties, in the government-to-government relationship, and in the history of the relationship between tribes and the United States government, of respecting Indian tribes and Indian nations as nations, and understanding Indian nations as sovereign. And I think one important strategic point is to emphasize to the United States government that enforcement of the provisions of the Declaration may be a slight advancement of current U.S. policy, but it is not a departure from it. This is consistent with the obligations that the United States itself has articulated and bound itself to in regards to indigenous peoples. And they don't need to be afraid of it, that this is really just a continued expression of those rights. Obviously, there are many examples to the contrary. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we sort of frame the Declaration in that way. With that, I close with, in my language, my tribe's language, Jaganaganan means all my relations. I think we are all related, and I thank you very much.
The last person that's going to speak from the panel carries on in respect to the articles in the Declaration as it pertains to language, media, conveying of information, and also protecting those cultural expressions and the properties of indigenous peoples and individuals. She reminds me of the Article 16 in the Declaration and talking about indigenous peoples have the right to establish their own media in their own language and to have access to all forms of non-indigenous media without discrimination. I drive to work every day, and I frame my work day based on one language, English. I drive down the street, there's a street sign that says stop. It's in English. And I go on Highway 264, it's in English. It's amazing how as a person, I frame my daily life each morning, each day, based on the English language. This individual has had the opportunity to be as a poet, a writer, lecturer, curator, and policy advocate who has helped Native peoples protect sacred places and recover more than 1 million acres of land. She has developed key laws in 4 decades to promote and protect Native nations, sovereignty, children, arts, cultures, and languages, including the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, National Museum of the American Indian Act, Native American Grace Protection and Repatriation Act and Executive Order on Indian Sacred Sites. She was a former executive director of the National Congress of American Indians and is now the president of the Morning Star Institute. And I take privilege to introduce to you Dr. Susan Shonharju.
Thank you. I want to first express my appreciation to the Special Rapporteur, a longtime friend and colleague, and I'm very proud of the work you're doing, and thank you for assuring that we have these kinds of forums to express our views of the Declaration. Also, I want to thank the University of Arizona faculty and staff and administrators, and especially the students, who are the hardest working people I've ever seen at a convention or a gathering of any kind. And thanks for doing so well for us and treating us so well. I want to begin by saying that especially in light of my Dene and Cheyenne brother here, who called out Maheo earlier. Maheo, for the Gista people, for the Cheyenne people, is the great mysterious. And that's what we're a part of, the greatest mystery that anyone has ever come up with. And we're working our way through that mystery, and we understand that all will be revealed at some point. It gets revealed very slightly and only around the edges in our lifetime. Yesterday, our friend Winsler Noisy from Apache country talked about the same thing that the Gista people were told by our great prophet, Sweet Medicine, that if we stop being the Cheyenne people, if we stop being the Gista people, if we stop being, as he said, the Apache people, if all of us stop being the native people, chaos will ensue. We're the people who pray for the good day, who actually do the things that we're supposed to do and that we've done for millennia at our sacred places, in our sacred heritage languages, reflecting our cultures, who the people are, what the people want, and how they're going to live with what we've been presented with, what we've been confronted with. We are the evidence of our ancient cultural continuum. And we are reminded on a daily basis by elders, by children, by every small voice, that we have to keep being the people we were meant to be, in the places we were meant to be them. When the Vejo, the spider, who Sweet Medicine said would come from a distant place and would cut lines into Mother Earth that would make something that looks like a spider web. And you see that if you look at an aerial view of any part of our great Mother Earth. You see that spider web, that pattern. So that's why we call the person who came here the Vejo, the spider. It's not about race. It's not about gender. It's not about place of origin. It's about practice, behavior, what the people do with what they have before them. It wasn't enough for us to make treaties and to grant the newcomers with sufficient land for them to make a country on. They had to try to break our spirits. And the miracle is not that we've survived, but that we've survived with our spirits intact. And that's despite some really targeted efforts, 50 years of, over a half century, of the civilization regulations, federal rules that outlawed dancing, outlawed the sun dance and all other so-called ceremonies, outlawed the acts of a medicine man, characterized them as pagan and heathen, issued these kinds of regulations saying no roaming off the reservation. You couldn't even leave to go to your sacred place without the express permission, a written note from the federal Indian agent. These were rules that were put in place without any authorizing law, put in place by the Secretary of the Interior, several of them, from 1880 to the 1930s, till 1935. Think how long that was. And if you wonder why it is that our languages are right on the edge of extinction, and so many of our sacred places are in danger of being bulldozed or poisoned or recreated to death, it's because of things that were set in motion by these civilization regulations that codified what was to have been the final solution for us. It criminalized everything that makes us Native people. They wanted us to stop being the Gista people. They wanted us to stop being the Muskogee people. They wanted us to stop being the people of the earth, the people of these waters. We have religious instructions that you can't complete a certain kind of ceremony without jumping in the clear blue stream. And boy, those are getting harder to find by the minute. These cultural rights are the basis for everything else in our lives. And if they're not, nothing else goes right. So these are the foundations. These are the undergirding strength of our peoples. So we really have to take care of them. And when I see some of our Native people behaving like the Veha and building casinos on our sacred places, as is happening with the porch band on our sacred, Muskogee sacred Hickory ground, historic place, sacred place, burial ground, digging up our ancestors, and then after a decade, just almost throwing them back in the ground without telling the traditional people of Hickory ground what they were doing. This is a horrible way to behave, and it's not a good sign that our own people are behaving like the Veho. So we have to stop that for our own protection. We have a lot of good laws that we have put in place. A lot of us have worked very hard on national Native efforts, and we've had lots of non-Native friends who have helped us gain protections for our ancestors, protection for our burial grounds, protection for our religions, protections for our languages. We have great laws that are in place that we can build on, but at the same time, we have a lot of white-gloved racism that leaves no fingerprints. Busy, busy, busy undermining these laws every second of every day. We no longer see these no Indians or dogs allowed signs. They've been taken inside. Unfortunately, they've been taken into the hearts of some of the people who are today working against us. So when we're made fun of on national TV, and when you have a pundit saying, get over it, well, we can't get over it because it's not over. The assaults on our languages, the assaults on our cultural rights, the assaults on the things we can hold and the things that we can't even see that are important to us are going on now. They're going on daily, they're going on minute by minute, and we just have to train more and more young people to really be the ones to combat this. I have a written statement that has a lot of recommendations that have been built on and refined and worked on by the National Congress of American Indians, by a lot of our Native nations. A lot of good leaders of nations and organizations have worked on the cultural rights agenda. We're not finished, and in some cases, we're just getting started. So for young people who may be listening to this, or students thinking, well, they've done everything. They've done the big things. We've done some big things and some good things. There's a lot left to do, and I hope that people will take a look at these recommendations. Some of them are big ideas, some of them are tinkering, because what's happening as people try to dismantle the good laws that we have, they're tinkering. They're undermining us bit by bit by bit and trying to distract us, trying to keep our minds off the major things that we have to do. And we have a lot of emergency things, lots of major things, but we can't ignore all of these things that are happening. We have all sorts of threats that are at every door of our homes. And we have to take care of all of them, and all of them all of a sudden and all at once. Thank you for inviting me here and for permitting me to exceed my time by a minute. Thank you.
Could we give another round of applause to our panel members?
Okay, so we are running behind. We are going to go to about 10:25. We'll still do the break. We will come back promptly, depending on how the break moves, but like to come back promptly then 15 minutes later. So we'll start at 20. And how many do we have total, Shauna?
It's about 15.
We have 15, so we might be able to get 5 or 6. And we're going to caucus over the break to figure out how we address this. We do have the open forum, and we may have some time in the next panel, but just give us a few minutes. So we'll take about 5 folks now, and Leonard will call those up.
Okay, and then respectfully requesting those that have already spoken yesterday, give time to those that haven't had the chance. So the first 5 individuals will be, and come on down, your name is elected, Linda Arnold, Sally Gonzalez, Tiviana Trujillo, Monica Palaka, and Ophelia Rivas. So Linda?
Thank you very much.
And the other is in the booklet that's been provided in your folder, starting from page, I think it's page 33, it talks about the process of submitting information and writing also either by email to Linda.
But an Scotch got so Bashashin, touchy need a shadow, not quite a net, a shanala. Yat have been a good morning. I'm representing the Native American Church of North America Incorporated. They are incorporated in the state of Oklahoma and have been so since about 1918. I am a Diné person and a previous executive officer of the NACNA, which is how we refer to the organization. For several years now, I have had the privilege of serving as pro bono legal counsel to the NACNA, along with my co-counsels, Steve Moore, who's with the Native American Rights Fund, as well as James Spotsford, who is with Wisconsin Judicare. The NACNA has submitted a written statement, so what I'd like to do this morning is just highlight 2 particular points that we would like to have on the record today. Greetings to Special Rapporteur Anaya. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for all your work that you do. Distinguished panelists that have spoken this morning and laid the groundwork or the foundation for this particular topic. It's just wonderful to hear your comments. I'm making comments on behalf of President Earl Arkinson, who is a Chippewa Cree. and has been leading the organization now for the last 6 years. Today I'll be speaking about the sacred herb peyote, or as the members refer to it, as the holy medicine. It's been a central sacrament to indigenous groups in North and Central America for well over 10,000 years. For about 100 years now, though, this way of worship has been known as the Native American Church or the Peyote way of life. In the early years, the Native American Church defended their religious freedom in part by forming nonprofit organizations, of which the NACNA is one. As I stated earlier, the NACNA originated in 1918 in the state of Oklahoma in Cheyenne country, and it was established to preserve and protect the free exercise of the religious practices and beliefs of the Native American Church. Today, the NAC is a strong church, due in part to a 1994 federal law that established a clear and protected right for Indians, Native Americans, to use the holy medicine in its bona fide religious ceremony. As background, all the sacrament that the NAC members use grows naturally in the United States in the southern Texas in a segment of the Rio Grande Valley. This, where the sacrament grows, is reverently referred to as the Peyote Gardens by NAC members. The sacrament is harvested by peyote distributors, and it is regulated by the Texas Department of Public Safety as well as the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency. Many of our members will make the pilgrimage once, twice, several times a year to get the sacrament. And before they leave, from a spiritual perspective, they will offer prayer. They will offer prayer when they get to the sacred site where the sacrament grows, and they'll offer prayer when they return home. In recent years, there's been a developing concern regarding the health and sustainability of the naturally occurring sacrament in Texas. There's the diminished quantity and quality of the medicine that has been occurring over the years, and what we'd like to bring to the Special Rapporteur's attention is that by all indications, if this trend continues, we're going to be in a crisis state where thousands of Native Americans who practice this ancient, vulnerable, and misunderstood way of worship will no longer be available. The supply will be diminished or unavailable. The last point I'd like to make is that the Declaration places a high value on protecting the integrity of indigenous cultural rights. And I must state on behalf of the NACNA that we still face problems today. Many of our members are confronted with unjust treatment. They're wrongfully arrested for the possession, transport, and use of the sacrament. And in many instances, the sacrament is confiscated by the official who's making the arrest, and it's treated in a disrespectful way, and we would like to have that brought to the Special Rapporteur's attention. Many of our members face prejudicial treatment in family law custody cases, discrimination in employment, and discrimination against parolees. Finally, one of our major concerns is that we're continuing to find that non-natives exploit the NAC ceremony and the holy medicine, sometimes for profit, which we find very discouraging. In closing, the NAC's mission is to preserve the divine medicine for generations because the sacramental use of peyote is essential to our way of worship. I'm happy to say that in reviewing the declaration, I found that Articles 11, 12, and 31 are relevant and support the NACNA's mission. And it's for these reasons that the NACNA brings these matters to the attention of the UN Special Rapporteur. We appreciate your time and your indulgence in listening to our concerns, and we ask that you also review the written statement that we've submitted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Sally Gonzalez.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm very honored to be here. I was going to read my presentation, but I think since you're going to give it to everybody or make it available to everybody, I would like to just speak on the issue of ethnic studies in what's happening in Arizona and the policies that are happening here in Arizona. First, again, I'd like to introduce myself. Inipo Sally Gonzalez Teteac. I am a member of the Pascuayaqui tribe, and I'm here representing various groups. First of all, my community, the Pascuayaqui tribe. I am here representing my Native American caucus at the state legislature. I am one of the 3 state legislators in our Native American caucus. I'm also here representing a group that I work with very closely, the Native American Directions Association, and we work very hard to promote the education of our indigenous people particularly in the Penjamo area, the Yaqui community in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm originally from Guadalupe, around the Phoenix area. But especially I'm here, like my colleague here, Steve Darden said, for my grandchildren and for my great-grandchildren that are yet to be born. I am a grandmother, a mother of 5 daughters and a grandmother of 21 grandchildren. And I'm very blessed, my husband and I are very blessed to have all these children and grandchildren. But what I'd like to bring before the Special Rapporteur is the policies that are happening here in Arizona, and we need your help. We need everybody in the audience help with what's happening. As you know, there is a pattern of some of the policies that has been happening against indigenous people, their languages and culture in the state of Arizona, starting with in '92, the Flores case, which the Flores case versus Arizona was filed by the parents of Nogales Unified School District because they felt that the state failed to provide a program of instruction that included adequate language acquisition, academic instruction programs, and funding at for low-income families, minority students, and that violated the Federal Equalization Educational Opportunity Act. In 2000, Arizonans voted for Prop 203, which is English for the Children, and it basically abolished bilingual programs in favor of the sheltered English immersion programs. In 2010, the infamous 1070 that now being heard or was heard this week at our nation's highest court, the Supreme Court, is really affecting us. As you all know, Yaquis and Tohono'othams and other tribes like the Kickapoo and the Cocopas has members on both sides of the border. So the border issue and immigration issue is the big issue here in the state of Arizona, and it is, we feel that my colleagues at the state legislature are really handling this in a really mean and spirited way, and we need to all band together. And I'd like to remind all of us that once the Americas had no boundaries, and for us, it is the belief of Native people that there are no borders across these continents, and we really need everybody to get involved and band together. And lastly, I want to say, which is my main topic, is in 2010, after 1070, also the state legislature passed HB 2281. And in doing so, they banned, it basically banned ethnic studies. And in particular, they did it, it was an special legislation, and it was against TUSD, Tucson Unified School District, and the Mexican American Studies Program. And to us, it's to most of us here, not only with our tribes, but also in Arizona, is that they're not just doing it to the Mexican American Studies program. And I want to just read, in closing, would like to remind my fellow Indigenous people here today that to remind them that I've not seen too many Indigenous people in our protest on these really discriminatory laws in Arizona. I think because we get into a because we also try to, work the immigration issue in however, in a different, and we forget that these Indigenous people that are coming across the border are really Indigenous, and that I would like to remind us that Mexican, the Mexican people are part of us. The word Mexican itself comes from the word mestizo, which means indigenous, and the Spaniard, the combination of both. And so I would like as many people to remind us that these are our people that are being attacked at TOSD, and also those that are coming across the border. I would really encourage everybody to read my document that Dr. Octaviana Trujillo, who got delayed in DC, so she's not going to be speaking, but to read it and to please come on board and help us with the discrimination that we're having here in Arizona. I thank you.
Thank you. As the chair of this conference, we're going to try and squeeze in 5 speakers, so please be mindful of your time. The next speaker is Octaviana Trujillo.
She's not here.
She's not here, okay. And then Monica Palaka. Or Mona, excuse me.
Mona, yes. First of all, I'd just like to greet each and every one of you. Good morning, and I'm grateful to be able to be here on behalf of the International Council of the 13 Indigenous Grandmothers. My people of origin are the Havasuapatch, the people of the Grand Canyon, the people of the Blue Water, and also on my paternal grandmother's side, I'm Hopi and Tewa from First Mesa, Palaka, Arizona. And I'm also very grateful and thankful to be able to know that we have consideration in the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, who is addressing the issues of human rights for the Indigenous people. And I give thanks to you, Special Rapporteur James Anaya. I honor you, give thanks to you. As I stand here, we think about our generations that are yet to come, the ones we won't see. That's what we stand here for. Our ancestors, they did that for us. That's why we're still here today. They made prayers, they recognized and acknowledged all the sacredness of life, everything from within Mother Earth all the way to the surface and all the way up into the universe. And so when I think about this declaration, I think also of its connection to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And even though that declaration was passed over 60 years ago, isn't it a shame that it's only been around 5 years or so that Indigenous people have been recognized and are now being acknowledged as having human rights. And so to me, I think about all of those ancestors and the relatives, the ones that stood their ground, that didn't give up in order for us to get to where we are here today. I think of all those elders, Chief Shenandoah, Thomas Banyaka, Philip Deere, Grandfather David Menungwe, Maina Lanza,
those relatives, those elders. I think about that day, that time on that human rights, the Day of Human Rights. That day they stood in front of the United Nations and they lit that sacred fire. They lit that sacred fire, they made their prayers before they walked in. That was what they did. So I just want to read one piece that has to be read. And it's that there's a piece that needs to be acknowledged and recognized. And it's the root of this issue, the root of our issues that we're faced as Indigenous people. It's that I want to bring to light that there's a book. The book is titled Federal and State Constitutions, Colonial Charters and Other Organic Law of the United States. It was published in 1877 by the U.S. Government Printing Office. It demonstrates that the United States is the successor state to the prerogatives of Columbus from the Queen and King of Spain, 1492, and the successor state to the Vatican Papal Bull of May 1493. These two documents provide clear evidence that the U.S. Indian law and policy have been based on the domination and dehumanization of American Indian nations and peoples. Further evidence is found in the U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Johnson and Graham's Lessee versus McIntosh, which said that Christian people had asserted the ultimate dominion, which is the right of dominion, to be in themselves as against natives who were heathens or non-Christians. All discussions of Indian land and water rights in U.S. law and policy take place in the context of these ancient documents. The underlying argument is that because our indigenous ancestors were not Christian at the time Christendom first invaded this hemisphere, therefore our contemporary indigenous nations and peoples are subject to an overriding, dominating, and exercise of power by the United States, otherwise known as the doctrine of discovery, which continues to be used in court cases related to land and natural resources of the indigenous peoples. And so this is an important piece that needs to be considered. It needs to be acknowledged by the United States of America that the doctrine of discovery is still being used in cases that are now before our courts, especially when it comes to our land, our sacred places, and our natural resources. Thank you for giving me this time to speak.
We're getting close to our 10:25 timeline. Ophelia Rivas.
Skuk siarik will so much come. Manyam sias uri the mam ke amajit ya tata muk amajit I the jewat sias aga tu hajit I the thimata got sias aga tu hajit. The park to mo chui I the mantumo to bo chui trago pot pui hayo sha Bosha squawk got either man the mo but took him more Manyanim how would it cook eat them mopi high to eat them cooker too much come eat them more merch eat them on watch you got timida man the bo chui. I want to say good morning, and from our autumn lands here we welcome everybody that's come here from a long distance, and to just tell you that our ancestors are here with us. And the thing that I'm going to say at this moment might be a little hurtful to some people, but if I didn't say it, because we're here discussing the protection and our rights as Indigenous people, I want to ask this man, Blake Gentry, to please cease and stop using the name of our figure, our sacred figure, that I am not allowed to say this name that he uses as his nonprofit organization name. because that's how much respect we have for it in our way of life. And because we're discussing this document, that is a document that we should all embrace and stand before it, because this is monumental for us Indigenous people here. So I want to ask that first of all. And I want to also start talking about our rights as Indigenous people and all the violations, great violations that's happening here on O'odham lands because of this government, the United States government, that has restricted our movement, restricted our way of life by enforcement of the immigration policies. As original people, we have difficulty crossing our lands. We have 3 checkpoints on the O'odham reservation, which is a third of O'odham lands. And when we say restriction, it means that if you don't have the proper documents, you have no right to move within those lands. If you can't produce a proper visa or passport, it's difficult to pass through this U.S.-Mexico border. And all the human violations that occur, I've witnessed this Border Patrol hold weapons to my elders, and I can't do anything. I've witnessed numerous violations, human rights violations, severe human rights violations that injure our people, that detain our people, that arrest and deport our people to our other lands, southern area of our lands in Mexico. And I personally had a gun held to my head to say that I was a U.S. citizen or a Mexican citizen when I insisted that I am an O'odham. This is my land you're on. You're a foreign government and policy. We did not invite you here. You're violating all conventions of this world to restrict my movement and restrict my way of life. And I further want to say that Amnesty International did release a report on March 28th that has recommendation. I think it's submitted to you already, Special Rapporteur. And I'm sure that we can talk about that, the recommendations, but the major points of it is that we are here now, and that in all due respect, we want to urge you, Special Rapporteur and High Commissioners that are here. This is a monumental step that we're taking. Be strong in your words to these governments, because it not only is a violation to my way of life, but all life that is unbalanced right now because of these, all of these intrusions. And in closing, I want to say that also that this university I've been boycotting for 10 years because it also receives funding from Homeland Security to develop spy technology, censoring technology, monitoring technology, and weapons of war that they use on my people. Just 75 miles from here, you will see enormous forces of Border Patrol that restrict our elders from going out to harvest our foods and our medicines. Every inch of the way there will stop you and they will ask you for documents. And we, as original people of the land, we need to have this stopped. And I urge you to be strong in those words when you make, and stand for all of us, because that's your responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, as I said, we'll have a 15-minute break. We're going to start sharply at 10:40, and then we'll announce how we're going to proceed. I just want to kind of talk to folks to get a best sense of the way to do this. So thank you.
Thank you.